Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Today, we are sharing a previously aired podcast. Have you ever needed to stage the look of a property to ensure it hits home with the intended audience? Here's what you'll discover. How professional furnishing can add $650 to $1,000 plus a month to your rental income. Why staging makes your property stand out, even in a hot market. Flexible solutions for Airbnb, diplomatic leases, and long-term rentals that match your investment goals. If you want your property to rent faster, for more money, and to the right tenants, this episode is your blueprint. We sit down with Monique Doucette of Trendsetter Home Staging Design, a specialist in transforming empty units into high-demand, high-earning investments. Let's find out what every smart property decision starts with. Today's episode of Furnishing Rental Units is being rebroadcast on the Knack for Business podcast with permission from Fred Crouch, the Property Wizard podcaster.
Welcome to the Property Wizard. If you are brand new to the real estate investment world or have limited experience, you've come to the right place. Freddie Crouch has over 35 years of real estate investing experience. He's seen it all, and he's ready to share it with you. This podcast takes an inside look at investing in real estate, what to look for, and most of all, how to move forward. Please welcome the Property Wizard, Freddie.
Welcome back, listeners. A big thank you to the team at Carl Speaks, headed up by no other than Mr. Podcast himself, Carl Richards. We would like especially to acknowledge and thank our producer, Kieran Doherty. Without him, we just wouldn't sound as good as we like to think we do. In supporting this awesome duo are Nathan Simon, who created the original sound score, and Carolyn Nicolai, who at every episode supplies us with new cover artwork. Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful effort. So, what did you think of our last guest, Bernie? We had Abby Rosen on. That was an interesting conversation we had with him.
It was kind of the cool stuff with Abby and him talking about once you start that process, once you start that business, you really have to have all your things locked up as tight as possible because every penny will count.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very important to keep good records. Now, not every jurisdiction, provincially or stateside, has those type of restrictions or caps on annual increases. So it's very, very important that you check with your local housing authority before increasing the rent or, making any changes or adjustments. So great point. Good point, Bernie. Wonderful. So anything in the mailbag today?
Ready? Absolutely. We have Sylvia Mark who sent off a question. They need to replace the flat roof on their fourplex. And while they have 3 quotes and all within 20 points of each other or 20% of each other, what else can we do to ensure that they're going to get the job that they're going to pay for?
Great question. And the number of times I'm asked similar questions having to do with contractor quotations. First of all, great move getting 3 quotations. As an absolute minimum, you should always have 3 quotations. The larger the job, I like to see maybe 4 quotations. And if you want to break it down even further, you could have 3 or 4 quotations on different parts. But in this case, we're talking about a flat roof. So great first step, you got 3 quotations. So evaluating contractor quotations is an important part of any major project that you undertake when it comes to your rental property. There are some pretty standard suggestions or rules to follow. Here are a few suggestions from IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, to keep in mind. I'm going to quote them here directly. Number 1, check industry statistics to determine if the prices given in the bid are within the range normally charged for this type of work or service. While your quotations are relatively close, be wary of any bid that is substantially lower or higher than the other 2. So what I'm saying is if you have 3 quotations and 2 are within 10, 20% of each other, I would even suggest that they need to be within 10% of each other. Then you have one that's substantially lower. The lower one isn't necessarily the best one. In those type of situations, you may want to call the contractor back and go over the parameters or the job carefully with them to make sure they haven't missed anything. So that's an important point. Number 2, request references and investigate the contractor's business history. Even before inviting contractors to bid on the job, ask for references from other landlords and or property managers. Again, very, very important. I always like, if I'm lacking or I need a contractor for a particular service that doesn't maybe fit within my contractor or suppliers list, what I'll always do is ask for a referral from another property manager or maybe a general contractor if it's a very specific job and I need someone to do just a task. So at that point in time, you've essentially got reference number 1, because an individual isn't going to refer someone to you, hopefully, that isn't going to be up to standard. So always request references. And again, the best type of referral is one from someone that you trust. So keep that in mind. The third point is check credit references. Now, not everybody can do that, but you need to make sure that the company pays subcontractors and suppliers in a timely fashion. The last thing you want is to hire a general contractor or just a contractor for a specific job, and then all of a sudden find out that you're being served with a notice of lien because that contractor hasn't paid his suppliers. So you need to check credit references. Now, by requesting references in the first place, you've taken a step towards that. This is probably the most timely or difficult thing to verify, but it's very, very important. The fourth thing that IRM has listed is speak to current clients of the contractor. Did the contractor start as promised? Did the contractor finish the job in a timely manner? Don't be afraid to ask the contractor for a list of his most recent clients, and don't be afraid to give them a call or go visit them and ask them those specific questions. The fifth item that IRM states is inspect jobs in progress or finish jobs at other sites. Now, again, that's not always possible, but if you can, that's a real great step to verifying what you can expect to happen on your own job site. One thing that I have a little bit of a bee in my bonnet, to borrow an old term, about is I like clean job sites. If I go to a job site and the contractor's just made a mess of the entire job and they're tripping over debris and items left over from the demolition or their own supplies, to me, that's an indicator that maybe they're not quite as organized, maybe not quite as professional as what I'd like. So if you can, again, it's a little difficult. You can't do it for everybody. And it should be enough, quite frankly, to ask for past or current clients and speak to them. If you do that and you're satisfied with that, no need to go visit a job site. But another thing that I like doing, and I recommend to other individuals that are acting as their own contractor, general contractor, is if you're short a trade and you need someone, if you walk around a neighborhood or see a particular trade, just the other day, I was walking down the street and I noticed there was a firm that specializes in demolition. You should feel free to go introduce yourself as a property owner, as a property manager, whatever hat you're wearing that day, and have a discussion with them. See what they're up to, see what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask questions. The important thing is, if you're not comfortable doing the necessary research or are unfamiliar with the scope of work involved, seek out the experience of a professional property manager or general contractor. They're by far, as a property manager myself, I have absolutely no qualms about reaching out to another property manager and saying, look, I had this task at hand or I need this done. So, who would you recommend? That doesn't mean that you have to use that individual, but it's always good, as I've said in previous podcasts, to have 2, 3, or 4 trades for each specific job. I know that's a mouthful. However, at the end of the day, these are very, very important points to keep in mind, because as property owners, as property managers, you're always going to come across situations like that. So keep those points in mind. Thank you for the question. A lot of this is covered in the course. We actually spend quite a bit of time dealing and talking of building your team. So these contractors, whether you're looking for a general or a specific trade, they're all part of your team. And as I've alluded to in the past, that is ever evolving, ever evolving. A trade that maybe supplied you with phenomenal service 5 years ago may not be the trade for you today. And that could be for a number of reasons. Businesses change hands. Maybe the contractors become exceptionally busy. There's a whole host of reasons why you should always have 2 or 3 or even 4 specific trades or contractors for each specific job. So wonderful. Super. Great.
Yep. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to send your emails to info@gentryres.com. That's info at GENTRYRES.com. All one word, Gentry Res.
From the current events desk of the Property Wizard, it's news of the week.
Okay, today I pulled a couple of brief but interesting articles. This one is quite interesting. I pulled it from the Market News, and it's written by Ryan Gardner. I chose this one because it really speaks of the opportunities that we as property investors, real estate investors, can take advantage of while addressing this entire affordable housing situation that seems to be, it's not just like a provincial or Canadian issue. It's an issue all over the world. As I spoke of last episode, we spoke about the situation existing even in the EU, where affordable housing, which doesn't just affect those who are maybe less fortunate or at the lower end of the income scale, it also affects those who traditionally would be called the middle class. And at the end of the day, it's all about supply and demand. If you don't have the supply when the demand is high, as it is, and it will be for years and years to come, prices rise. And as prices rise, what ends up happening, less and less people can enter the market. So getting back to the article, and I'm going to paraphrase this. This is from Vancouver. It's about an initiative that Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart has introduced. So let me read this to you. Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart's housing initiative aimed at increasing densification was approved by City Council Wednesday. The plan, called Making Home, and HOME is an acronym for Home Options for Middle Income Earners, will allow the owners of 2,000 lots currently zoned for single detached homes or duplexes to be developed into strata units of up to 6 suites. Now, for those people not familiar with the term strata, that's like a condominium unit. Sometimes it's referred to as like a co-op. So this is really amazing stuff. And this speaks back to a couple of other articles we've reviewed. If you remember, Bernie, there was the LA article about how City Council was allowing for people to build these much larger home in subdivisions or, estate type settings that actually weren't single family homes, which blended in with what was there currently, but were actually duplexes and triplexes and were subdivided that way. So in this particular case, Stewart is saying, look, we're going to allow you to build up to 6 times the number of housing units on a single lot, which traditionally would only allow for a single family home. So this is a fantastic initiative. So it goes on to say each lot would be subject to appropriate rezoning, although the new guidelines will allow height increases and the option of units being built below grade. The plan aims to increase affordable housing options and make it easier to find a home in the city for middle-class households or for those wishing to collaborate on a group mortgage. So again, this touches on a couple of really important points. They're referring to, again, like a co-op type setting or co-tenancy type setting when they're referencing a group mortgage. And Kennedy goes on to describe the plan as the single biggest shift in housing policy Vancouver has seen in a generation. So good for them and good for every other city council that's being imaginative and looking at ways to increase densification in their city cores. I think this is an exciting opportunity. So again, like we're so fond of saying, if there are no problems, Bernie,
There are no opportunities.
that's right. So this is a brilliant way to turn around and deal or address the housing shortage. And again, what kind of makes it unique is that it's targeting middle income earners, which a lot of people don't quite comprehend or don't understand. Affordable housing affects not just those, again, in the lower income brackets, but actual middle income earners as well. So brilliant initiative. Good for him. Very, very happy with that. This is just a little different take. We've spoken about developers taking Class C office buildings and converting them into residential units. In this particular case, this presents another option for some of these buildings. So this was written by Scott Dipple with CBC News, and it was actually posted just a few weeks ago on February 1st. Briefly, he states or he reports that the owner of a vacant 5-story office building in Calgary's Beltline area wants to convert it to a self-storage business. Brilliant use. So these type buildings are not just great options for residential units, but here's a fantastic use for them as well. So again, the owner of a vacant 5-story office building in Calgary's Beltline area wants to convert it to a self-storage business. The building would still have retail commercial uses on its ground floor, but the upper floors could become a place where inner city residents, could store their personal belongings. And they're addressing a problem that a lot of Calgary seems to be particularly hard hit. Office vacancy rates in the downtown core in Calgary are running at pretty close to 25%. Again, think outside the box. This is a brilliant way to use unused real estate. So great forward thinking, another wonderful opportunity.
Do you want to start investing in real estate but just don't know how or where to start? Then Real Estate Investment, The Essentials, is the course for you. This interactive digital course takes you step by step through the process, from determining what kind of real estate investor you may be, to raising investment dollars and assessing opportunities. Why wait? For a limited time, you can save $250. Just enter the coupon code podcast at checkout. Visit gentrylearning.com to start your journey towards financial security and independence.
We are very happy to have as our guest today Monique Doucette, owner and lead consultant for Trendsetter Home Staging and Design, where her primary focus is on providing solutions to homeowners and landlords, as well as working with real estate professionals to prepare homes and rental units for the real estate market. Monique started in the rental furniture and staging business in the mid-90s with Advantage Brokers Furniture Rentals as both a partner and furnishing consultant. There she provided long-term furnishing solutions for those coming from all points worldwide. Her client base was primarily made up of those in the high-tech and diplomatic world where mandates were usually a year or more. Monique actually started furnishing homes for us as part of a larger scope residential management mandate that we had, and she became an invaluable member of our team. She is a certified member of Canadian Staging Professionals, CSP, which is recognized worldwide within the real estate industry, and is also a board member of the Ottawa chapter of the Real Estate Staging Association. Welcome to the show, Monique.
Thank you for having me.
With the incredible amount of experience you have, I know you can speak to our listeners about a number of different topics, staging your rental units or home to appeal to the maximum number of potential tenants or buyers, and furnishing your rental units to achieve maximum returns, whether for long-term tenants or for Airbnbs. And that's exactly the role that Monique filled for us when we were filling these homes full of rental furnishings. And we'll be speaking a little more about that during the interviews. So in this particular case, Bertie's going to take front and center, and I'm going to fill in kind of the blanks from the retail end of things. And it should be a really, really interesting show. So take notes, because as many of you have heard me say before, one of the best ways and easiest ways to increase cash flow on an income property, a residential income property, is by adding furniture to the mix. You can rent a furnished one bedroom for far more than what you can a vacant one bedroom. The same holds true for a home. And you're going to appeal to a very different clientele too. Many people that are coming from overseas, they're in the diplomatic corps or they have professional type jobs, and it may not just be them that are being transferred over, but maybe their entire team. So you're usually dealing with some very, very desirable tenants, people that are well funded and don't mind paying for the extra service. But this has a trickle down effect. You can do this with most any rental unit you have. So keep that in mind. Real simple way. So we're going to try to fill in some of the blanks for you. Bernie, take it from here.
Monique, so obviously there's a big difference between staging a rental unit or your home and supplying furnishings for a longer term rental. Can you tell us how long a typical staging term is versus how long a diplomatic or professional long-term rental typically is?
Yes. Well, our rental agreements are initially for 1 month, and that includes upfront the delivery, the setup, and the destaging at the end. Now, these days, because properties are selling very quickly, as you know, in this hot market, renewals are not often needed. But when they are, the cost of that is substantially less than the initial first month because we don't have all the setup required in that first month.
How long would you normally say if you're dealing with a diplomatic transfer? How long are those terms usually?
Usually they would be around 2 years.
That's been our experience too. Anywhere from they usually start at 2 years and then they go forward from there. I mean, very often what happens, particularly in the diplomatic corps, it could be politically sensitive too. You may have somebody come from a country where there's a change or an election, and very often what they'll do is recall those diplomats that are, all over the world and replace them with their own. Great point. So big difference.
That's interesting. So can you take us through the process, whether it's for a short or long-term rental from the time of the initial phone call?
Yes. So it's a 3-step process. The most important part is the initial consultation. And that's where we go through the home room by room and we compile a list of recommendations. We write a very detailed report for the homeowners or the sellers. And in terms of areas to be fixed, sometimes it's colors that need to be changed. Many times there are a lot more furnishings that need to be removed. Once the homeowner has this report, then they do what we call the work. And they follow as many of those recommendations as they can within their timeline and their budget. But it's provided to them as kind of a working document. And so it helps them during the stressful time. It also helps the realtor because sometimes they're touchy issues. And we find that if we can come in and address them, it takes that pressure off the realtor. And then once they're ready, we come back and we showcase or style it with either additional furnishings or accessories that are needed. So that's the gist of it.
It's a little different when you're filling a home or staging an apartment for rent. The rental process is very similar, but usually, Monique, when you're, staging a home for rental, there isn't any furnishings in it. So in that case, you supply all the furnishings and the accoutrements that go with that, correct?
Yes, and you're right. What we do is we just go in simply and there's no report generated at that time because you're not really dealing with a person per se. You're dealing with the seller, but there's no work to be done. So we just generate our design plan and then go from there.
So when you're dealing with, our experience was we would have you into a single family home that essentially wouldn't have anything in it.
Mhm.
And in that case, what you did is you used to take your furnishings either out of stock or actually work within a certain budget and fill that unit up, correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Interesting. So how do you manage when someone has pets?
So we have typically what we call either occupied stagings or vacant stagings. Obviously, in the vacants, there wouldn't be pets, but it's a little touchy. People are very attached to their pets. And sometimes there are odors that come with those pets too that we need to address. So we recommend that the pets be removed if possible. And we recommend some deep cleaning as well if that's needed. And then, of course, for any showings or things like that, they should be removed with everything that belongs to them as well. That's not something you want to see when you're coming into a home and looking to buy it.
What do you do in a situation where you've put homes into a rental? Let's say you have a house you've set up to rent furnished and they had a pet. And so when they finish their term and you remove the furnishings, what happens to that furniture?
Well, there is a premium that is paid above the regular fee if there are pets in the house.
So just kind of moving along here, could you share with us the cost of typically stage a 1-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom home for the purposes of renting or selling the property?
So as I mentioned before, the initial cost is always higher. And then the following month, if it's needed, would be substantially lower. But if we're just going to compare sort of a 1-bedroom as opposed to a 3-bedroom, we're looking at around 3,200 about for a 1-bedroom. And that includes all the inventory being brought in, the furniture rental, the delivery of the furniture, then the planning at our end, the installation, and of course, at the end, the D stage where you come and get the inventory that's in there. And so as opposed to, let's say for a 3-bedroom, you would be looking at around 4,500.
Oh, you mentioned earlier about if it goes past that first initial month, what would it cost for a when in a 3-bedroom during the second month?
Okay, so for a 3-bedroom in the second month would be only 2,300.
Okay.
So it's about half.
Yeah. So a substantial decrease.
Yeah. That initial setup, it requires a lot of behind the scenes work, a lot of, pulling inventory, packing it, designing what kind of, furnishings you're going to include in that house. If it's a period house, you want to provide, artwork and furnishings that reflect that area. So it requires a lot of behind the scenes planning, I guess what I'm saying.
Yes. Not quite as easy. It's easy to step into the finished product and say, wow, but there's a lot of work behind there.
And I think that's what people don't understand. You have all these popular TV shows now on HGTV and they make it look so easy. But there is a considerable amount of hours that goes into getting your inventory over to that property.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So how much should a landlord expect to spend when furnishing an apartment or home for a longer-term rental or Airbnb?
That would depend on the size, of course, and whether they're doing, a 1-bedroom as opposed to, let's say, if they had a cottage property that had 3, 4 bedrooms, right? So whether the landlord's looking also to just have a furniture package, whether that landlord wants somebody to come in and actually style it, because then you get that magazine look. It's a very important marketing tool, especially when, potential renters are looking at the photos first. So you want them to be picture perfect.
Do you also cover off the linens and the towels in the kitchen?
In an Airbnb, yes. In a rental unit, that would depend on what the landlord was looking for specifically. But
if we had someone from a diplomatic corps, we would, obviously, because they're coming from overseas and they're going to need all of the, everything like, cutlery and plates and small appliances. So just depends, like Monique said, just depends.
That's excellent. So how much could a landlord expect to receive in rent or furnished suite or unfurnished apartment or home?
You know what? I'm going to pick up that question because I did an awful lot of that. So if Monique, you don't mind,
No,
I'll do that. So a stereotypical 3-bedroom home in a subdivision, depending on the market. Of course, this is all market sensitive. So just to give you an idea, if that home would normally rent without any furnishings for between, let's say, $1,700 and $2,500 a month, depending if you go midline, again, with the individual room packages without breaking the bank, you can probably expect to get anywhere from, on the low end, $650 to the high end, maybe another $1,000 a month for a furnished apartment or 3-bedroom home. So it's quite substantial. So the payback on the investment, buying the furnishings in the first place, is probably somewhere between, 12 to 18 months. Again, everything's very, very subjective. When it comes to an apartment, of course, the numbers are less. You may spend $8,000 or $9,000 on furnishings. That apartment, depending on where it is, you may get anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000. I would suggest to you that the payback is going to be somewhere, 16 months, or about $500 to $600 a month. So that's what you could expect to get for furnished versus unfurnished. So again, the payback, I always tried to look at it, and depending on the length of the term, if it was a 1-year term, then we were looking for payback somewhere in around 9 months. And what we added to the cost of the furnishings was any direct expense related to the removal of that furnishing if it wasn't a longer term type rental or an Airbnb. And if it was 2 years or more, you can kind of take the cost of the furniture and you'd look for payback, probably somewhere after 18 months or a year and a half, and do the reverse math. It's not rocket science, but that's generally what you can count on getting. So I hope that answers the question, Bernie, and I hope, Monique, I didn't, step on your area.
Well, actually, if I could just add to that, an apartment being furnished and then staged would also, of course, I'm always looking at the marketing side of it, and the photos that are being put out there could be rented at a higher cost than a non-staged one, is what I'm trying to say. So when people are looking, they're going to go for what, visually is appealing to them. And also, people are not able to visualize things very well without furniture. So once you put the furniture in there, it kind of plants a seed.
Good point. All right.
Very nice. So obviously it costs more to stage a property in the short term versus the cost associated with amortizing your furniture purchase over a longer period of time, such as a Airbnb. What additional costs need to be taken into consideration when staging a property?
Well, the biggest cost is always going to be that first month, but things that you need to factor in there are what goes into that first month. And I think we spoke about that earlier. So, the delivery, the installation, the planning. So those are all the things that go into that first initial cost.
Would you find then that if you're buying furniture for a longer haul, a longer use, like a rental or Airbnb, what would be the typical lifespan of the furniture? Like, in other words, you may have had to pay it off in maybe a year and a half. Do you expect to get like 3-4 years, or do you expect a faster turnaround time with the furnishings?
Oh, let me speak to that one. Generally speaking, as I alluded to earlier, I think maybe Monique did, when you're dealing with a diplomatic or a international transfer, sometimes and very often those terms get extended. So you may have purchased furniture for an initial 2-year period, but I know in our instance, we had some of these initial 2-year periods extend into 5, 6, 7 years. So during something like that, sometimes the furniture needs a refresh. I know that we had called on Monique to replace, probably a couple of beds after 2-3 years. Maybe somebody just wants a styling change. And for some of your better clients, you don't mind doing that. But you also had a huge warehouse too, Monique. So what would end up happening, correct me if I'm wrong, so you'd get furniture from a rental or diplomatic placement. I know you'd have it shipped to your furniture. So what did you do with the furniture that you couldn't rent again? Let's say it was damaged or just worn out. What happened to that?
Well, in those cases, we would try and repair them as much as we could, and we would donate often to some causes, organizations that are looking for furniture for refugees or things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we needed to maintain all those pieces regularly. And, as you say, styles also change. So, depending on how long the pieces were out for.
When you find that the maxim kind of holds true, you get what you pay for. So better quality furniture would last much longer than, let's say, and look at, I don't want to, malign IKEA, because by all means, I enjoy their products. It's a wonderful firm. But I'm just saying this hold pretty true that, more expensive furniture would usually last longer or wear better than less expensive furniture.
Absolutely. It's worth the investment.
So what's your feeling when it comes to painting the walls, other than the walls should get painted? Should it be neutral throughout, or is it okay to add a splash of color?
Now you're getting to something that I'm really passionate about. So buyers generally are looking for neutral colors. That's not always possible because of timelines. Some people are trying to get their properties to the market very quickly, so it doesn't allow for painting. But generally speaking, the backdrop should be fairly neutral so that you can let the best features of the home show. There are those homes where you go into where the color is so dominant that you don't see anything else. You can't get past that first initial impression, right? So we recommend always, if you're able to, give a fresh coat of paint. That will update any look. It's actually one of the most economical ways when you're trying to get your home ready for sale, is just to give it a good fresh coat of paint.
Interesting. So it also would make sense that if you're either refurbishing a house, building it, or building new, to have someone like yourself come through and say, hey, here's the color of the flooring, here's the color of the walls, and here's the furniture, right? So everything's coordinated, as opposed to you retrofitting things afterwards.
Yes. And many home stagers and designers do color palettes that way. And it's like you say, it's a great way to start any kind of renovation, because then you have kind of your plan, what colors you're dealing with, and they flow well. And it's much more conducive to, photos, number one. That's always our big concern when we're working with realtors, getting those beautiful, stunning photos. And so paint color is a big thing. Yeah.
Very nice. So for many of our listeners, this may not directly apply, but are there any statistics available to indicate how much more a staged rental or resale unit will receive versus unstaged?
Yes. Well, I have some stats from RESA, which is the Real Estate Staging Association. So they did a survey in 2020 of 13,000 staged homes. Now, it was the beginning of the pandemic. The market is getting hotter and hotter all the time. But at that point, sales over listing price, 85% of staged homes sold for 5 to 23% over list. Return on investment, with an average investment of 1%, approximately 75% of sellers saw a rate of return of 5 to 15% over asking. And then lastly, the average days on the market. Now, again, today we're seeing homes go within a week, but typically staged homes do sell faster. They were averaging at that point 23 days on the market. But basically, they increase the number of offers that you can get and the selling price, even in hot markets. And that's what people have a bit of difficulty understanding. Like, why should I invest when there's a hot market? And we always want to say to them, you know what? You don't want to leave any money on the table. So go for as much as you can. You only have one chance to do this. So take your time and do it right.
That's some great advice. So that's really interesting. For every 1% spent, and that's 1% of the value of the home. So if you have an $800,000 home, they're saying that for every 1%, so if it was an $800,000 home, if you spent $8,000 on the staging, painting it, neutral colors, of course, you can expect anywhere from a 5 to 15% return. That's pretty amazing. That's really something else.
Well, Monique, you know what? Thank you for being our guest today. And I'm sure the listeners will have all sorts of questions for you. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, you could get me through email. You could get me on Instagram, or you could get me at my website. If you want to see some of the work we do, you can get me at Trendsetter_Home Staging. That's on Instagram. If you want to check out our website, it's www.trendsetterhomestaging.com, and email Monique at trendsetterhomestaging.com.
Monique, thank you so very, very much.
My pleasure.
It's time for the Property Wizard's Word of the Day.
Riparian rights.
So, riparian rights refer to the rights of the owner of property on the banks of a watercourse, a watercourse can be defined as being a stream, a river, a lake, bay, really any body of water, to take advantageous use of the water on, under, or adjacent to his or her land. There can be certain exceptions, however. Those who own property on the banks of the Ristigouche River, for instance, known worldwide for its exemplary salmon fishing, are prohibited from tossing a fishing line into the water butting their own land. It's a very unusual set of circumstances. In this particular case, the fishing rights are in fact held by separate license by and for the exclusive use of the owners and guests of several major corporations who own substantial lodges along the river's shoreline. It was originally set up that way to protect the resource and encourage outside monies from the tourism factor, or to recognize the fact that it was it is still to this day a world-renowned salmon fishing river. So they've done this to raise funds and to protect the resource. We could debate the merits all day long. However, the lesson here is that you should never take the use of the waterway which abuts your property for granted. And keep that in mind. There's also issues that it's not necessarily dealing exclusively with riparian rights, where some people are really surprised to learn they bought a waterfront property and people are constantly walking back and forth across their front or rear yard, however you prefer to call it. There's a constant debate as to what's the front of the property, what's the rear of a property when it comes to a property that's actually on a body of water. And so some people are quite surprised when they find out that people are walking back and forth across their frontage. But then what they do, or what they discover, is that there's actually a legal right of way right across the front of your property. And very often your property line will go to the high water mark, which is that point where the water in its maximum capacity at high tide kind of comes up your shoreline. So that's usually where your property line will terminate. So at low water mark, there's absolutely nothing stopping anyone else from walking back and forth across your property. So that's riparian rights. So thank you for listening, everyone. Join us next podcast when our guest is Trevor Jacob, who's going to talk to us about heating and cooling systems, associated costs, and all the things we never think about until something breaks down. Isn't that the truth, Bernie?
Very much so.
Yeah. This is a must listen to if you're a landlord with any size portfolio.
If there's anything else you want to know about any of the topics we've covered today or past podcasts, send us an email. info@gentryres.com, info@GENTRYRES.com. GentryRes, all one word.
Don't forget, everybody, that you can save $250 on your next Gentry learning course by using the phrase podcast, all in capitals, when checking out. Again, thank you for subscribing. And remember, if there are no problems,
There are no opportunities.
wonderful. Thanks all. See you next podcast.
Thanks for joining Freddie on another edition of the Property Wizard. Got a question? Ready to invest? Email info@gentryres.com. And if you'd like to find out more about the courses offered through Gentry Learning, visit gentryres.com. Until next time, remember, if there are no problems, there are no opportunities.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVIGH.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motivateyou.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motivateyou.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner. And Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.